My job is to whisk you away from your everyday lives and take you to other places, other situations, let you live the lives of other characters. But in order to do that, they have to be real enough to be compelling. I wanted to write a book that sort of looked at the fact that adolescence is by definition about fitting in. But there are some kids who will always stand out, and because of that, they're a moving target. All of my kids at different points were bullied. And it was all post-Columbine. And I kept thinking, how can we live in a world post-Columbine that still allows this to happen? And that became 19 Minutes.
My name is Kelly Johnson, and I am the Community Relations and Marketing Manager for High Plains Library District. This is just one of the opportunities the library brings to its community. We call this our Signature Author Series, where we annually bring in an author that can create conversation and create an experience that our library patrons and library supporters can rally around.
When I was on a book tour for 19 Minutes, I did events in both Littleton and at Roquarry High School. And they were among the most moving experiences I have had as an author. In Littleton, the parent of a child who had been killed asked me to read a particular passage from 19 Minutes about how a community goes back to normal when normal has been changed. High school shootings are almost always exclusively motivated by bullying. College shootings sometimes have other circumstances muddying them. Things like, for example, bad grades or a love affair gone wrong, mental illness. Those were things that all happened in the Virginia Tech shooting with Cho, who was the shooter. What I like to say is that you may not find a kid like Cho at every school, but you will find a kid like Peter in my book who is bullied.
Events like this are important to the community. It gives us a chance to take the content that's in a book and really apply it to our lives and how we can implement it in our communities, make things better in our own small little world.
In the 1970s, there were 3 shootings. In the 1980s, there were 5 school shootings. In the 1990s, there were 28 school shootings. Up to 2008, there were 29 shootings. Since 2013, there have been over 200 school shootings. They learned that all school shooters were teased and excluded. All of them were accused of being gay. All of them had depression, anxiety, some kind of personal issue going on. All went to schools where acceptance of differences were slim. All had access to weapons or to the internet to make a weapon, and all of them had moved from a small school to a larger impersonal school. What I think we need to look at really carefully is the role of the media in these shootings as well. And the reason I say that is because, think about it, last time you saw a school shooting, what do you remember everyone talking about? The shooter. What was the shooter's home life like? What was his last Facebook post like? Oh, look, here's a picture of him with double ammunition crossed across his chest. Why do they do that? Because it sells ad space. It's terrifying. You keep watching because it's salacious. What if instead the media didn't do that? What if they didn't even name the shooter more than once? And then it was just the shooter. But instead, they ran retrospectives on the lives of every kid who was a victim. It might not sell a lot of ad space, but somewhere out there is a 13-year-old right now watching a coverage of a school shooting thinking, nobody knows my name, but I know how they can. And it's really important for kids today to realize too that inaction is an action and to move past that. So how do we do it? How do we fix this? Well, the answer, I think, is quite scary because it involves throwing the responsibility back to the kids. Look, we as a group are way too polarized in this country to tell someone how not to bully. Kids are the ones who have to teach us.
This particular author is well known for a variety of reasons. Her books tend to focus on current events, hot topics, things that are controversial, and her newest book, Small Great Things, is no exception.
20 years ago, I tried to write a book about racism, and I would play devil's advocate with myself. I didn't know if I had the right to write a story like that. On one hand, I am quite clearly a white woman. Who am I to tell people of color what racism is like? But then on the other hand, I would think, well, come on, you write all the time as people you're not. So why is this different? Well, because racism's different. It's really hard to talk about without offending people. And so as a result, most of us just don't talk about it at all. I gathered together a group of women of color who overlooked my ignorance about their lives and their upbringing. There was the young mom who came in with the world's cutest baby on her hip in an absolute panic one morning. And it was the morning after there was yet another shooting of an unarmed African-American man by the police. And she came in frantic and she said, how do I do it? How do I keep my son safe when he grows up? How do I teach him to not be black? The African-American woman who stood up and said she has to put on a metaphorical mask before she leaves the house every day so she can be the kind of black woman other people can handle. And it was the stories that I was listening to that just got me. Those women were instrumental to me in writing this book. They not only shared their stories with me so that I could braid them together to become the character of Ruth, they were the ones who read and vetted the voice of Ruth to make sure that she was in some way accurate to their experiences. I could not and I should not have written this book without their input.
Jodi's message is important because it facilitates conversation around the idea that people can have different perspectives but find commonalities in them.
The voices of an African-American woman were not the only ones that I needed to learn about, because there was another character in the book who hopefully was quite different from me, and that was the white supremacist father. So I met with two former skinheads. The first is a man named Tim Zoll. Tim grew up in California in a very privileged family. He went out with his group of skinheads one night, wilding, and they beat up a gay man, and they smashed his head against the curb, and they left him there to die. Years later, Tim got out of the white supremacist movement. It happened because he had a 4-year-old, and he was at a grocery store with her, and his 4-year-old pointed to the African-American man in front of them and said, "Daddy, look at the big N-word." And all the people in the grocery store turned to him and went, "How dare you? How dare you teach her that?" And he was shocked because he really thought he was creating a future for her that would be safer. And here he maybe was the target of all this hate in her direction. And that was the beginning of the end for him as he began to extricate himself from the movement.
Her book has some undertones of current things happening in our world. Race relations, prejudice. She writes a beautiful story that challenges the reader to think about the role they play in the world and the way we treat each other and the things that we can do or the things that we don't do maybe to create conversation in our community that makes us kinder and more willing to engage in conversations on hard topics.
I learned a lot writing this book. I learned that just because you don't talk about racism doesn't mean that you are not part of the problem. I learned that racism isn't just personal prejudice. Racism is prejudice plus power. If you want to make a difference as a white person and you're trying to figure out what do I do? How do I start to change things? How do I change my own life? Don't say all lives matter. Here's why. I'm going to break it down for you. Look, of course all lives matter, but it is also a fundamental, documented truth that right now you are more at risk in this country if you are a person of color. All lives cannot matter until Black lives matter more. That's why we say it.
Her novel this year that she's focusing on, it really brings to light some of the current topics and the things that have been happening in the world and the hostility, and it challenges the reader to reflect on that and discover the things inside of us that we can do to make a change. And I think that this is the opportunity of a lifetime for people, and I'm so proud that the library was able to offer this and that our community is engaging in this conversation and willing to listen to Ms. Picoult and the topics in her book.
If we're going to grow and change, we need to listen to the voices that aren't like ours. That's how change happens. If you study the human brain, the structures in your brain that allow us to hate people we do not know are exactly the same structures that allow you to help people you do not know. So that means if you go out and commit a hate crime, it is exactly the same part of your brain that will light up as if you decide to donate money to the family of a child, an African-American child who was wrongfully killed by the police, a family you will never meet in your life. And that tells me that love really is the flip side of hate and that we can make a difference. Thank you for being here. Please be the change that you want to see in this world. Appreciate it.
You know, libraries are not about just the materials that we offer people, but we're about the experiences and the things that we can do to help create a strong community. And the author visit, particularly this one, is a great chance to offer an experience to people that are willing to engage in conversations and self-reflect on the small great things that each of us can do to contribute to a more kind and open-minded society.